Before I go on, let me tell you why I'm here. I'm here because nothing in this world, nothing, upsets me more than cruelty. There's nothing rebarbative you can possibly think of that hurts me more than cruelty. Particularly cruelty to animals and children. I'm someone who gets upset when he sees a hedgehog squashed on the road. So you can imagine how I feel when a baby elephant is orphaned or a child is abused. It hurts me deeply. To that end, I go around doing talks. And the money that I raise from the talks, the fees that I get from the talks, all go to animal welfare and children's charities. Also, I've written this book. The talk today is an extract of this particular book. It's called What's God Got to Do with It? It costs £9.95, and as I say, all the proceeds from this book sale of this book, go to charity as well. The book is about the history, psychology and philosophy of religion, and the last chapter, the denouement, actually establishes, as best I can, being an ex-mathematician, the probability of the existence of God by examining and analysing all the arguments, both for and against. So I evaluate the argument from beauty, the argument from revelation, the argument from sin, the argument from divine hiddenness, the ontological argument, the teleological argument, and so on and so forth. I evaluate all those and come up with a probability, because we can't say that God either definitely exists or definitely does not exist. All we can come up with is a probability. And that's what I do in the book. So, the talk today is to do with why religion is declining. Now, I should say first of all, I don't have time to go into all the statistics which support that particular viewpoint. Now, I know what I'm going to say might upset some of you. Don't let it. I'm the messenger, and I'm talking facts. And if you want to see me afterwards, by all means do so. I can talk for hours on this subject. Why is it in decline? Well, there are many, many reasons. And to help me along, I will from time to time give you quotations from some brilliant people, sometimes the most brilliant minds that have ever lived, to give you an indication of what's happening with our current society. Sometimes they're just brilliant people, like Woody Allen, for example. Woody Allen, famous director and actor, who says, if there is a God, he's an underachiever. Of course, Woody Allen also said, my wife is very immature. Whenever I have a bath, she comes into the bathroom and sinks all my ships. Sometimes, as I say, I'll mention people far, far greater than Woody Allen, some of the greatest minds that have ever lived, to support my thesis. Of course, religion is in decline. We know that. I haven't got time to go into all the statistics because there are so many. But if you look at the British Social Attitude Survey, or the latest UK census, or you look at the Pew Research Report in the USA, or you look at the American British Identification Survey in the USA, or you look at the Telegraph Survey, or you look at the latest Wynne Gallup Survey, they all point the same way. Religion is declining, and it is declining on a rapid basis. We're going to discuss why. It's a lot to do with belief, of course, a lot to do with faith, and how that is shifting, how belief is shifting, how faith is shifting. The great French author and philosopher Françoise-Marie Arouet, otherwise known as Voltaire, said faith consists of believing when it is beyond the power of reason to believe. And of course he's absolutely right, because inside every one of us, there is an imaginary set of weighing scales. You have faith on one hand, on the one side, and you have reason on the other. And the two things try to counterbalance each other. The two things, faith and reason, are immiscible. Martin Luther himself, the primary priest of the Protestant Reformation, who once was a philosopher before he became Doctrine Bible at the University of Erfurt, said, reason is the enemy of faith. So inside every one of us, there's this balancing act going on. For some of us, faith outweighs the reason, and for others, reason outweighs the faith. What's happening now is that reason is beginning to take hold. The United Kingdom now is regarded as the 7th least religious country in the world. The most irreligious country in Europe is Sweden, where only 15% of Swedes believe in God, closely followed by Estonia and the Czech Republic. These are facts. So it's moving in a certain way. And of course, when we talk about faith, it's worth understanding it is not absolute. It is by no means absolute. Because if you were born during the age of antiquity in ancient Greece, you would have believed in the gods of Olympus. You would have been told to believe in the gods of Olympus. And if you were born in Bronze Age Scandinavia, you would have believed in the gods of Valhalla. And if you were born in the last 1500 years in Western Europe, then you would have been told to believe in God. It's as simple as that. It is not absolute. It is a function of when and where you were born. Now the intelligentsia have long understood this. Long understood it. The great Roman philosopher and writer of the 1st century CE, Lucius Annaeus Seneca, said himself, religion is regarded by the common people as true, by the wise as false, and by the rulers as useful. Some 1800 years later, Napoleon said something quite similar. He said, religion is excellent stuff for keeping the common people quiet. And Napoleon used religion to his own advantages because he was a devious little devil. And a brilliant general, by the way. It is a very peculiar thing, his belief. Very peculiar. There was a group of nuns who would never take a bath without their bathrobes on. And when asked why this was the case, when after all no man could see them, they replied, well, but you are forgetting about the good God. So in a way, this group of nuns saw the deity as a kind of peeping Tom, whose omnipotence was sufficient to enable him to see through walls, but which was totally confounded when it came to bathrobes. It's a very peculiar thing, his belief. When Bertrand Russell was at a book signing for one of his books some time ago, many years ago now, the great Bertrand Russell, brilliant philosopher, even more brilliant mathematician, he described how at the book signing a man came up to him and said, I agree with everything you've said in your book apart from one thing. And he said, what's that? He said, you say that Julius Caesar is dead. And Bertrand Russell says, well, what's wrong with that? He says, he's not, because I'm Julius Caesar. It's a very peculiar thing, this belief. You can believe almost anything, in actual fact. And I won't go into some of it, some more serious things that you can believe. There's no time for that. However, why is religion in decline? Now, there are lots of reasons, and I'll come to the main one. One reason might be that the schisms and controversies that have taken place over the years, like, you might say, the ordination of women bishops, or gay marriage, or the disqualification of certain divorcees from some churches for remarriage. From remarriage, I should say. Or contraception, particularly in AIDS-ridden countries. And perhaps most of all, the abhorrence of the paedophilia scandals. They've all had an effect to contribute to an erosion. But that's not the real reason. None of those are the real reason. The real reason is simply this: that as members of the older generation pass on, their unconditional belief is not being conserved by the younger generation. The religious baton is not being passed on as unerringly as in yesteryear. It doesn't happen. The young don't believe it. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to go into all the reasons as to why, but let me give you an example of what's happened. There was a man called Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who was a brilliant computer scientist who is responsible for the invention of the World Wide Web. Now, this man is to be applauded because he didn't seek to surround his invention with a wall of patents and enrich himself that way. He made this invention publicly available. The internet, the World Wide Web. We live in an age of communications like we have never seen before. We may never see anything like it again. So Tim Berners-Lee unwittingly ushered in a new age of enlightenment. And young children, school children, can now go into the internet and can find out, ask questions, and find out all manner of things that we couldn't possibly have even dreamt of, because we would have had to go to libraries. They can do it in an instant. They reason in a different way to ourselves. They learn, for example, that roughly 2 million years ago, the first of the Homo genus came into being, called Homo habilis. After Homo habilis, several hundred of thousand years later, came Homo ergaster. And then, later still, came Homo erectus, and 200,000 years ago came ourselves, Homo sapiens. Now, in all of that time, these primitive people believed in gods. Anything they couldn't understand, they had a god for it. There were gods of rivers, there were gods of trees, mountains, seas, heavens, war, peace, harvest. There were gods for practically everything. There must have been, if we go back through that period of time, hundreds of thousands of gods. Hundreds of thousands of them. The young children who look at this reason that all those gods have disappeared. They see the new kid on the block as the Christian God. He's only been around 4,000 years. He's one of the few that are left. Let's just say, they say, that there were only 100,000 gods over that period of time, going back a couple of million years. The probability of this God being the right one, they say, is 100,000 to 1 against. That's how they think. They wonder about the imperfections in the world. They learn about the great Roman philosopher Lucretius, who wrote in his poetry, "Had God designed the world, it would not be a world so frail and faulty as we see." And they wonder about that. They wonder, when they look up David Attenborough, what he has to say about this business of imperfection. When David Attenborough was asked by a reporter some time ago, they said, "David, has your 50 years of observing the natural world convinced you of a divine creator?" And so David replied by saying, "Well, you know, whenever people talk about the natural world, whenever creationists talk about the natural world, they always talk about hummingbirds and orchids and sunflowers and beautiful things. But I," he said, "think about the lower worm, which is a parasitic worm boring through the eye of a boy sitting on a bank of a river in West Africa. And it is going to make him blind." And I say to these people, are you telling me that this God you believe in, who is all merciful and looks after each one of us individually, are you telling me that that God could think of no other way for this worm to live than in the back of an innocent child's eyeball? So they wonder about that. They go into their computer and they ask what Thomas Jefferson thinks. Thomas Jefferson was one of the greatest minds in history. He had a towering intellect. He was as rare, intellectually speaking, as finding a George Best on a football field or a Wally Hammond playing cricket on the village green. That's how rare a Jefferson would be. When John F. Kennedy hosted 49 Nobel Prize winners in the White House in 1962, he addressed them by saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, this must be the greatest level of talent ever seen at the White House, the greatest level of human knowledge ever seen at the White House, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined here alone." He went on to say, Jefferson, by the time he was 32 years old, could calculate an eclipse, he could survey an estate, he could tie an artery, he could plan an edifice, try a cause, break a horse and dance the minuet. I'll leave you with two quotes because time is so short now. Jefferson himself said, and this is what the kids do now, because great men can tell them it's worth doing. Jefferson himself said, "Question with boldness even the existence of a God, because if there be one, he must more approve the homage of reason than of blindfolded fear." Einstein agreed with that. The great Thomas Paine did. T.H. Huxley did. Spinoza did. So many brilliant minds did. But I'll leave you with one final quote from Bertrand Russell, who said, We should not burden ourselves with a hankering after the past, or a fettering of the free intelligence by words uttered long ago by ignorant men A good world, he said, needs knowledge, kindliness and courage, and it doesn't need the rest. And if you wonder why young school children are thinking this these days, it's because of the amount of information they have available to them. If you doubt the veracity of what I'm saying, talk to your grandchildren. I go into schools and I discuss with school children philosophy, ethics and religion. This may surprise you. I'll leave you with this final statistic. Only 10% of all the pupils I talk to in the academies and state schools believe in God. Only 10%. If you doubt the veracity of what I'm saying, simply talk to your grandchildren and see what they say. And if you wonder why religion is in decline, it's simply because the religious baton is not being passed on as unerringly as it was in yesteryear. Because these children think like we never did. Thank you.
Thank you, Burt, for that. Erudite, well presented, but challenging talk. It is with trepidation that I say, are any questions? Peter.
I'd just like to know what your definition of God is.
Well, my definition of... there are lots of definitions. In fact, there was a programme on TV
So what's the God that children don't believe in?
Yeah, I'll come to that. There was a programme on TV just on Sunday called The Big Questions. The subject of the debate, which lasted 1 hour, was, is God the problem? Every one of those people in that place had a different view of God. But the one that the children that I talk to think about is the Christian God, the God that Jesus was talking to, or the God that Muhammad was talking to. That's the God that they're questioning.